Hello?
Good afternoon. I hereby call this October the 9th meeting of the Public Safety Committee to order. As always, our first unofficial item of business is to always give thanks to our police, our fire, and our emergency management departments for the work that you do every single day to keep our community safe. I will give a special shout out to Police Recruit Class 78, led by Chief Penn. We just had a graduation last Friday, and I believe we graduated 10 new police officers at Winston-Salem State University to the city of Winston-Salem. So we just want to say congratulations to Chief Penn, the command staff, and the brave men and women of the department. We wish you much success, and we look forward to continue to work with you. That being said, for those who aren't aware, the public safety agenda is comprised of two particular sides. One's the consent, one's the general agenda. Items on the consent agenda are typically approved with a sweeping motion unless a member of this council committee pulls an item for consideration. With that being said, members of the committee, are there any items we should pull for consideration from consent?
C1, please.
Are there any other items? If not, I'd entertain a motion.
Motion to approve the balance.
Second.
It's been motioned and properly seconded. All in favor of approving the consent agenda, please vote yes. Opposers, no.
Larson said yes.
All right, the consent agenda is approved unanimously with the exception of item C1. Madam Clerk, if you call that item, please.
Item C1, resolution directing the expenditure of, Item G1, information regarding the Winston-Salem Police Department's vehicle evidence storage facility.
If you call item C1, please.
C1.
No worries. We'll get to G1 eventually, but we'll start with C1.
Let's start with C1. Item C1, resolution directing the expenditure of opioid settlement funds for the city of Winston-Salem, North Carolina for the fiscal year 2023-2024.
Thank you, ma'am. Councilmember Mundy, would you like a presentation or do you have a specific question?
Thank you. I don't need a presentation. I just want, if you would kind of iterate to the general public how these funds are being used. I had at least several people call me and they wanted to make sure that these funds were used for the purpose they were intended, people who had been affected by opioids. So if you could just briefly explain how the city will use these funds.
I'd like to recognize Scott Tesh, our budget director.
Thank you, Chairman, Councilmember Money, members of the committee and council. The city, as part of the FY24 budget, appropriated monies that we had already received from the opioid settlement fund, and we will continue to receive those monies for, I think, another 20 years or so. But that money is currently being used to partially offset the operating cost of the BEAR team, which does respond to mental and behavioral health concerns, as well as many substance abuse issues. And so one of the allowed operating response criteria for the MOA for the opioid settlement funds is a diversion program like BEAR that keeps law enforcement both away from substance abuse users, but also provides them with appropriate resources and options to seek the resources that they need to get treatment.
Thank you very much.
Yes, sir.
Any other questions for Mr. Tesh? Councilmember Larson.
Can you go over the math a little bit for me on this? I couldn't understand. The total amount we received was $416,000.
The total amount that we are appropriating, or that was appropriated as part of the FY24 budget, was $412,840.
And that was to BEAR, or was that to the?
It is appropriated in the general fund, and it is used to offset the cost of the BEAR program, yes.
That's the total amount authorized.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
That was the total amount authorized, the $412,000.
That is the total amount authorized in FY24 for use of opioid settlement funds. The cost of the BEAR program is more expensive than that. It is only partially offsetting those operating costs.
And there's another program that's mentioned in this graph. I think it's about.
We are only using the opioid settlement funds for the BEAR program right now. It's not offsetting any other cost.
No other funds are being allocated at this point to balance it out.
The amount that was appropriated in '24, this $412,000, was all of the funding that we received last year. We will receive an allotment this year. The money that we received this year, we intend to appropriate next year to cover bare operating costs in FY '25. There are no other programs being funded from the opioid settlement.
Okay, I see. Thank you. That's what I was questioning.
Yes, sir.
Appreciate it.
Any other questions for Mr. Tesh? Seeing no further questions, is there a motion and a second to approve item C1?
I move to approve item C1.
Second.
That's been motioned and properly seconded. All in favor, please vote yes. Opposers, no.
Not coming. There we go.
Item C1 is approved also unanimously. That moves us on to the general agenda. Now we'll move to item G1, please.
Item G1, information regarding the Winston-Salem Police Department's vehicle evidence storage facility.
Thank you, ma'am. Giving us a presentation today is Ms. Brittany Gomez with the Police Department. You have the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Taylor, other members of the committee and council.
Good afternoon.
My name is Brittany Gomez. I am the supervisor for the Winston-Salem Police Department Evidence Management Section. And I believe ACM Rao was very helpful in helping put this together. We have currently a space on Old Milwaukee Lane that houses our vehicles that are seized for evidentiary purposes. And we have had that lot for some time. It used to be shared with the city's abandoned vehicle enforcement. And some years ago, they relinquished that lot, and we now have custody or possession of the entire space. It is actually built on a landfill from the 1960s, and things were done a little different in the 1960s with landfills than they are today. Some of the lining and the way they filled it. And so over time, this space has deteriorated to the point that we feel there are some safety concerns there. We also have, because of the deterioration, lost quite a bit of space for vehicles because we just can't park in that space because it's not flat anymore. It's not conducive to parking vehicles there. Currently, we have 265 vehicles on this lot. We also keep our other gas-powered items there, like mopeds, golf carts, generators, lawn equipment like backpack blowers, trailers, lawnmowers. And so it has, over the years, become an issue, and now it's a safety concern for us. The photo that you can see now is from 2022, just kind of an overview. You can see the cars are kind of haphazardly parked in different spaces, and that's because of the way that the lot will only allow us to park cars a certain way. So we have looked for space in the city and county that might be suitable to relocate. I know city real estate has been very helpful in looking for a space as well, but at this time, they have not been able to locate an area that would suit our needs. And so at this point, the city staff has planned to retain a real estate broker to try and identify potential areas to relocate. And then hopefully if something is found, we can meet again. But this is just for informational purposes to let you all know kind of where we're going and the need that we have. Some things that we do need, flat land, space for 400 vehicles, something that has power or we can get power to it, an electric fence, a chain link fence as well. We need a robust camera system, exterior lighting, gates with a padlock, numbered spaces. We ideally like a space that has limited foot traffic, but it's not isolated, and then internet capabilities as well. Some of the photos I'll show you. This is the entrance. It has created quite a shelf of separation where the land is sliding. And so it has created numerous challenges with getting vehicles into and out of the lot. The concern obviously is damaging vehicles, damaging wreckers. people falling, sliding, trying to shut that gate can be a challenge because of the steep incline. And then we've lost about 20 spaces in that upper spot because of that shelf. That's just another image kind of from the lot looking out. There's just I've got a few photos in here of the shelf itself showing the separation. And you can see just how this land used to be flat, and it's just bowed and curved and bumped up in quite a lot of spaces. Because of the deterioration, it's also caused some issues with our fence, and we've lost some of the voltage in the electric fencing that goes around because of the overgrowth, but also because of the way that the lot has shifted. Some more photos showing where the ground has separated. And I think that must be it. But that's all I have for my presentation, but I'm happy to take any questions that you might have or things I might clarify.
Any questions for Ms. Gomez? We'll start here and just work our way around. We'll go with Councilmember Larson.
Well, thank you for this. This is incredibly illuminating and terrifying in a way. The big question ultimately is, why do we have 255 cars? Well, do we not have a method of crushing them or selling them or doing something with them?
Sure. So we have them for a myriad of reasons, but primarily because by statute we have to retain them if they are biological evidence. And a lot of these vehicles they are biohazardous, or they have DNA that has to be preserved. And by statute and preservation laws, we have to hold on to these items, not just cars, but other property. Cars are just the biggest thing. That we have to hold on to them until the end of the sentence in those particular cases. And in some of these situations, they may not have made an arrest. It may be unsolved. And so we can't dispose of them yet. Some of them have been disposed of in court, but maybe the sentence isn't over for 30 years or longer. And so by law, we have to retain them.
So the evidence that you've shown us would indicate that there's no future in this lot at all as far as continual use. Are you repaving, expanding, or anything else, really?
We agree with that, simply because we would have to, thinking through it, we would have to remove all of the vehicles, renovate and repave, and we just don't know the damage underlying the asphalt, how deep it goes, and how much work it would take to bring it up to code to where it could be usable and functional again. And in the interim, where do we put the evidence? How much extra work are we doing, and potentially disturbing the evidence, moving it back and forth multiple times? So we agree kind of with your line of thinking that it may just be best to try and locate a space that would hold us moving forward for some time.
Well, I'll be anxious to follow how you resolve this. It looks like a problem.
Thank you.
It's only going to get worse. I mean, we don't have any space. The land's collapsing underneath you, and you're adding, how many cars a year roughly are you adding to this? Any idea at all?
I would say probably 30, but we also are removing, it's in constant transition of returning items, or returning items, cars, but then also getting in new inventory. But I would say probably 20 to 30 a year.
Jeez. Thank you. Good luck.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to hearing back from you.
Councilmember Mundy.
Thank you. I did not even know this existed. Deferred, this is a statement, and I'm not addressing this towards the police department, but towards us as a council and us as a management group. Deferred maintenance always costs more. And this is just an example of so many things I've seen that we should have taken care of in the past, and we need to start doing that, doing a better job of that. So are you ultimately trying to find a finished parking lot that has all these things, or a plot of land that could be prepared? Asphalt could be put down and fence around.
I think we'd be happy with either, but I don't know. I don't know finding a parking lot that's just vacant or for sale that would hold that number of vehicles is available. Maybe the broker can identify something, but we're certainly open to land. Again, we're looking more for flat land that if it needed to be cleared, and we're okay if it's wooded around it, just to kind of have it not as visible maybe to foot traffic and passersby. But where we're at now, the growth is so great that it has really encroached upon the outer perimeter fencing. And I will say that the urban forestry group within the city has been, and vegetation management has been really great to us in the past few months to go out there, especially just in the summer, all that extra growth. They have really worked to try and make that a perimeter around for us, for like a mow path. That has been really helpful, but it's still, with a bad storm, we get limbs that come over and takes out the electric fence, and then it's a work order, and so on and so forth.
And just to clarify, this is a lot that we own. We own this land as opposed to any kind of a lease.
Correct.
Do we expect that there's any kind of revenue to come in from selling it? I mean, it's on a landfill, so.
I don't know. And I know we have that there's additional land around this lot that belongs to the city. It kind of is adjacent to the Overdale dump, if you know where that is. So it's kind of on that side of Old Milwaukee, on that side where
Okay.
the dump is there.
Like John, I wish you a lot of luck because that's a tall order, but I know you'll come through.
Thank you.
Councilmember Scipio.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I too did not know this existed, but what happens is it's horrible that we have this kind of poor maintenance. It's not just maintenance, it's because of it was a landfill and how that landfill was produced. And so we're seeing the results of that. But my question, I'm concerned about how do we turn this land into something that's useful? And I think that does require some investigations because we still have a need for land for different purposes. I would hate for it to just be abandoned because it is a landfill. But I think we deserve investigating that because the other thought is that there are a lot of abandoned warehouses that are not being used. And I think we might want to be creative in trying to figure out, we might have indoor storage capabilities. There are a couple of buildings that are off of 25th Street, right across from Bloom Construction. It has a spur line right off of that, and there's big warehouses over there that if we could think a little bit out of the box and put lifts so that you can stack these things, you don't need to take them down until you need it, or some of the tobacco warehouses that are abandoned right at Patterson and Liberty Street. I'm not certain if we've investigated looking at that kind of storage. Right now, it seems like we're looking at outside storage, but I would hope that as we move forward, we would look at other options than just outside. But thank you, it is a need. And the question I really wanted to know was how long do we have to keep these vehicles? But you did answer that. It just depends. Do you know by offhand how the oldest vehicle we have, not oldest in terms of make and model, but one that's been there the longest?
I will refer to my coworker, Jonathan. He might know. Do you know Jonathan?
If you'd come up to the mic so the folks who may be watching are able to hear.
He thought he was going to sit in the back.
It's your opportunity to get on TV.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the council and committee. I believe the oldest vehicle that we have in our inventory dates back to 1999.
Wow. Oh, wow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember McIntosh.
This facility is on the same road that where the high fructose corn syrup plant is and our vegetation landfill is. So it's an industrial area. There's not going to be ever, this is not an opportunity to put housing on for multiple reasons. But I had questions too about whether we had identified any other uses for it internally. I would think because it's not very big, it's not that marketable to a commercial user. I just wondered if we might be able to reuse it for our mulch purposes since it's near the vegetation landfill, but it may not be big enough for that. And that entranceway is really, really difficult. I've been down there. No, it'll be interesting. What we're asking for, what we're looking for is going to be as scarce as hen's teeth. And we've tried an awful long time and to get a piece of land suitable for our driving range. And this will be not quite as large a lift, but really pretty difficult also. But thank you for the report.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? Sounds like the general consensus is that we should move forward with contacting a broker. And when we contact that broker and the numbers started coming back, it makes sense that we might have to make a business decision. We may have to look at, maybe refurbishing the current lot, or does it make sense to move forward with an additional lot? But I'm seeing heads nod, and I think we're in consensus to move forward at this time. Mr. King, did you want to add to it?
I'll offer just a little bit of context just for information purposes. Councilmember Taylor, this may come up, it may not. There we go. So this is the lot that you see here. I think the question was sort of how many cars we put in there every year. The image on your screen is from 2010.
It's not on our screen.
Yeah, it takes a minute to go up to the satellite and come back down. There we go.
Okay. Can everybody see it now?
Yes.
So that's 2010. That's 2014. That's 2018. And that's 2022. So that gives you a little bit of idea of sort of the increased usage of this facility. To Councilmember Scipio's point, we did explore kind of the idea of trying to find some indoor storage space for this particular use. Two challenges. One is the size of the building needed for this, and two is the building code. When you start basically storing those vehicles with those fluids and materials in them, the building code becomes extremely problematic in trying to make that happen. So we did initially start out exploring that option, and it didn't prove to be very fruitful for this.
Any questions for Mr. King? Councilmember Mundy.
I know you didn't ask so much for advice, but have you looked into the Weeks plant? Or the parking around that?
The plant itself would pose probably some of those same issues. The parking lot around it, we have not. That kind of gets back to the earlier question about existing parking lots versus building new. Those are some things we'll have to kind of go through with our broker to understand, because anytime you're putting this much new impervious surface down in the city, then it triggers other things like stormwater management, and that's a very costly endeavor. So do you buy a commercial lot that's already developed and not pay for stormwater improvements, or do you buy new and build it the way you want it? Those will be some of the things we'll have to chase down. I'll just mention one other comment about reuse of this facility. The challenge on this one is those unlined landfills, you're constantly going to be fighting a losing battle because that soil is going to be shifting beneath you. So I think the question is, if we take this facility out of commission, what do we do so that we don't leave an eyesore for anybody looking around? And I think those are conversations that will have to be part of the overall project as maybe a phase 2. But finding a productive use on that is going to be very challenging.
Any additional questions for Mr. King or Ms. Gomez? All right. That concludes item G1. Thank you for the presentation and for the words. Item G2, please.
Item G2, overview of the Civil Service Board legislation.
Mayor, members of the council, many of us have been following this legislation, and as it came down from Raleigh, our city attorney is going to give us a brief update on the matter so that we can be aware, and I'd like to turn this part of the meeting over to her at this time.
Thank you, Chair Taylor, committee members, and members of City Council. What you have before you is a general overview of the Civil Service Board legislation. Generally, I'll cover the legislation, the composition and structure of the Civil Service Board, the meetings and meeting procedures, authority and jurisdiction of the Civil Service Board, the hearing process, and next steps. As you may recall, the General Assembly in August of this year enacted legislation that establishes the Civil Service Board for both Greensboro and Winston-Salem. And the bill applies to certain police and fire department employees of both cities. The Civil Service Board is part of city government. It will be composed of 5 members, 1 member elected by the employees of the police department as defined by the bill, 1 member elected by the employees of the fire department as also defined by the bill, 1 member chosen by city council, 1 member chosen by mutual agreement of the police chief and the fire chief, and then the last is chosen by a majority of the 4 members of the board, and if they cannot agree, then city council will appoint by default. The board members are qualified voters of the city of Winston-Salem. They cannot be employees of the city. Also, the legislation provides that city council shall establish the election process. Generally, just as a process question, generally city council will, or at least the mayor's office, will send out a notice of vacancies on various boards and commissions. And so my belief is that perhaps we can use, or city council could use that process for this, where you send out a notice soliciting interested citizens or citizens who are interested in serving on the Civil Service Board. And that process could be used for both city council to select its member, as well as the fire department and the police department to select the members that they are allowed by the legislation to appoint. Basically, also, the legislation provides that the Civil Service Board shall set its meeting calendar in January of every year. The notices go out just like notices for other city boards and commissions. The agenda must basically provide for general business and any other business that goes before the Civil Service Board. And all action items must be submitted to the Human Resources Department for implementation. Also, in terms of jurisdiction and authority, by the legislation, the Civil Service Board has the ability to propose certain rules as to personnel policies within the police and fire department. However, city council must be the final authority or decision maker with respect to those rules. The subject matter of the proposed rules include probationary periods, disciplinary suspensions, discharge, reduction in rank, compensation, investigations, and record keeping. Just so you know, many of the city's personnel policies already address some of these in terms of probationary periods, disciplinary suspensions, and so forth. So to some degree, we're hopeful that the existing policies might provide some guidance to the board in terms of coming up with policies and so forth. Also, the Civil Service Board, by majority vote, may initiate investigations as to matters within its authority and jurisdiction. The hearing process before the Civil Service Board. By legislation, the Civil Service Board provides employees in the police and fire department with the opportunity to request a hearing for certain matters. And those matters consist of discharges, suspensions, reductions in rank, involuntary transfers, denial of a promotion, and denial of a pay raise. The hearing process before the Civil Service Board. Basically, an employee must request in writing a hearing before the Civil Service Board. As you all may remember, if you look back at the Greensboro provision versus the City of Winston-Salem legislation, there is a discrepancy in about 2 sentences as it relates to the hearing process and the triggers for that hearing process. And as I've mentioned to you all before, I've been in contact with the members of the General Assembly, in particular our legislative delegation, about the need to do a technical correction, basically amendment to our portion of the legislation to correct that so that it lines up with the City of Greensboro. But essentially, the employee has the ability to request a hearing in writing, and the time frame basically it's meant to be at least 10 days from the action that was taken, but no more than 30 days. And then once the employee requests a hearing, then the hearing must be set between 5 and 15 days unless extended by the Civil Service Board. Employees have the right to be represented by an attorney, and also the Civil Service Board has the ability to issue subpoenas. And basically, once that hearing has been held, the Civil Service Board has 10 days after the conclusion of the hearing to issue its decision. And the employee or the city, once that decision has been rendered, has the ability to file an appeal of that decision to Forsyth County Superior Court and request a jury trial. Just in terms of procedural matters, the Civil Service Board may choose its own legal counsel for hearings, with the fees to be paid for by the city. The city attorney's office may represent the Civil Service Board only when at least 4 of the board members may request it. Again, as I mentioned earlier, there are about 2 sentences in the legislation for Winston-Salem that is different from that in Greensboro, and so we need to do a technical corrections amendment. We're hoping that the General Assembly will have a technical corrections bill this session. If not, then it will roll over, I guess, until the short session, which does not start until May of next year. So, next steps, what we're working on right now, basically are a couple of things. While the General Assembly passed the legislation, typically whenever a board or commission is established, the city code is amended to include the provisions of that board in the code itself. So we'll be working on an ordinance amendment to include the Civil Service Board as part of the city code, since it will be basically a city board. Also looking at establishing, as I mentioned earlier, the procedures for the election, because that's, again, something that council has to approve. As I mentioned before, I think the standard process whereby the mayor's office issues a call for vacancies on the board to be filled, and in this case, they have to be citizens of Winston-Salem. So we'd use that process. Individuals would submit an application, and those applications would come before the city council for the city council to basically choose this one person. And then, like I said, the fire department employees would choose theirs, the police department employees would choose theirs, and then the police chief and the fire chief have to agree on that person. And then the 4 would agree on another person, and if not, then the city council will appoint that person. So the other thing, too, is that by legislation, this board, city council rather, has to establish a budget for the Civil Service Board. That right now we're trying to determine based upon the experiences of some of the other cities, what we should recommend or what the city manager should recommend to the board as the budget for the Civil Service Board. So we're still working on that right now. So that's a quick overview.
And Attorney Carmen, what would this budget be used for?
You have legal fees that you're going to have to basically be responsible for, and any other things that the board itself might need. But the main thing that comes to mind would be the legal fees. That's a piece that the city council, the city has to be responsible for. And at this point, we're not sure what that's going to look like, but I would suspect that most of that would be for legal fees for the board.
Thank you, ma'am. Members of the council, many of us may have comments, but I'd ask if it's okay that we hold any comments and ask any direct questions that we may have about the Civil Service Board to Attorney Carmen. Councilmember Matt.
Over there.
Okay, I saw so many hands. So he said ladies first, so we'll go with Councilmember Scipio and work our way around.
Thank you. Attorney Carmen, I think everybody needs to have some clarification on this board. Does it supersede current personnel policies for any of the things it's going to consider, discharges, grievances, and that? Does the board supersede current personnel, HR personnel?
Well, let me sort of break that down into a couple of points. In terms of the grievance process, employees will still go through the grievance process. Fire and department employees will still go through the grievance process. And part of the language that's missing, that's in the Greensboro bill, but's not in the city of Winston-Salem's legislation, deals with that. But generally, yes, they'll go through the grievance process. Now, if they do not hear back within 30 days from the hearing officer to go all the way up to the city manager, and if they don't hear back within that 30-day time period, they can go ahead and file an appeal as to a grievance. And then there are other employment matters that do come before the board. The board has the ability to adopt, well, I should say recommend policies and procedures, personnel policies and procedures regarding those subject matters that we just talked about earlier. But at the end of the day, City Council has to approve those. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Okay.
I think it does.
Okay.
Councilmember Mundy.
Two questions. Microphone back on. Two questions. You didn't mention the length of the terms or term limits, so normally that would be established in the bylaws. So will this group create its own bylaws?
Well, actually, the legislation addresses the terms. The terms are 2-year terms. It allows for successive terms. It does not clearly indicate whether or not City Council can put its term limits on applied to the board. City Council generally has 2 term limits, and then you serve a lapse in that term for the length of the term. So in other words, if it's 2 years, you can serve 2 2-year terms, and then you have to have a lapse of 2 years before you're eligible again. It's not clear from the legislation if that lapse provision that you have in the code would apply, but it does provide for 2 terms, a 2-year term, and then successive terms.
Thank you. And then the next question was, I understand that there's a reason for, and with the police department, internal affairs and investigating internally when there's an issue or an incident. There's also the Citizens Review Board, which is doing something else. Kind of a 2-part question. Would then the CSB have access to those findings, or would it come before the other? How are we going to deal with queuing those 3 things up?
As I see it, based upon the language in the legislation, the Professional Standards Division, that process will still go through its normal course. And if at the end of the day, some action has been taken with respect to an employee, for example, if an employee at the end of that process and it goes through their department and so forth, is suspended, then that employee would file a grievance like they normally would, go through the grievance process. And if that person has not heard from the hearing officer, in this case, the city manager's office, within 30 days of that hearing, then they have the right to go ahead and appeal it to the citizen civil service board, rather. And so that, to me, is how that would work. Does that answer your question?
Somewhat. I mean, yes, it does.
It doesn't replace the process that's there. In other words, professional standards would still do what it normally does and make the recommendations that it normally does, and the chief and staff would take the actions that they normally would. It just gives the employee the ability, if they're not satisfied with the outcome of that grievance that may come from that, to have another body, the Civil Service Board, basically hear that appeal.
Yes, so that would be the natural sequence.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily address how the Citizens Review Board fits in, but if I were sitting at home listening to this and I had not been involved in the process, I might ask, why do we need this and a Citizens Review Board? So could you briefly explain what the difference is and why we would need both?
Well, I'm not sure I can explain why we need both, but apparently the General Assembly, after being petitioned by some, thought that this was an opportunity to have another layer of review of certain personnel actions, in particular the ones that are listed in the bill, suspensions, demotions, and terminations, and so forth. So it provides another level of review beyond just the supervisor and the city manager.
And the Citizens Review Board is not established by the General Assembly. That was established by the Winston-Salem City Council. Is that correct?
Okay, you have the Civil Service Board, and then you have the Citizen Police Review Board, 2 separate bodies, citizens, individual citizens, not police officer or police employees or fire employees and so forth, but individual citizens who feel like they were somehow mistreated by a police department employee or police officer have the ability to file a complaint under the CPRB, the Citizen Police Review Board process. So that's basically for citizens. The Civil Service Board is for the police and fire department employees to use as an alternative or as an additional tool to have their grievances heard if they're not satisfied with the current grievance process, basically.
That perfectly explains why we need both. Thank you.
Councilmember Larson.
Really just one question. How does this CSB interface with city staff currently, or would it interface? In other words, how would it be staffed with a secretary keeping minutes, what have you? What is the responsibility of the city to support the CSB?
Well, by legislation, the city has to support the Civil Service Board. And by legislation, it says the city clerk or the clerk's designee basically will serve as secretary to the board. So the city's basically responsible for this board, just like any other board, except you don't have other boards who have the ability to have their own legal counsel and have the city pay for that legal counsel. And of course, they're making decisions which could be appealed to beyond the Civil Service Board to Superior Court. So there are some differences, but you don't have a board that has, in addition to having staff support, basically a legal budget.
So our attorney office does not directly support the CSB?
No, it does not. Based upon the language in the legislation, if 4 of the members of the Civil Service Board agree that we can, then certainly my office will. And certainly we will do what we can when asked.
Councilmember McIntosh.
Most of my questions have been answered, but this is another unfunded mandate from Raleigh, correct? We don't,
Yes,
we don't
I
get
would-
reimbursed for any of this. This comes out of our pocket,
Yes.
whether we like it or not. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Let me also mention, too, that I think my staff, as we currently do, also will just oversee the process to make sure it flows correctly based upon what was enacted by the General Assembly and what's adopted by City Council. And if we do see that the board is not acting in accordance with such, I do think it's our responsibility to make that known. So I don't want it to appear as if we're totally hands-off. And then I think also my office probably would have a role in terms of the appeal itself, but in terms of representation of the board, no.
Any other questions for Attorney Carmen? Any comments?
Not for public consumption.
Councilman Larson.
When do we expect this to be implemented?
You got a couple of things going on. The bill itself does not have a deadline, but it does talk about council basically adopting a budget for the board. So what we're looking at in conjunction with the folks in Greensboro is a July 1st, 2024 date, startup date, which will give you all time, as I mentioned before, to adopt a budget, adopt the ordinance, and then the policies and procedures, which the board may recommend, the Civil Service Board may recommend that you all have to approve. So you have a couple of steps you've got to go through, and I think that will afford you all the time to do everything that's necessary.
So making the appointments would begin when?
Well, you need to get the ordinance in place first, and again, it's my goal to try to get that to you all by the first of the year. So I would think maybe doing the appointments, get everything in place, maybe starting April, May timeframe, just so the board's up and ready, geared to go July 1st.
Any other questions or comments on item G2? All right, that completes item G2 and both our general and consent agenda items. Is there any other further business that should be brought forward for consideration for the good of the order? Seeing no further business, we'll consider this meeting to be adjourned. Thank you.